But as the dust has settled, there can be no doubt that this law is working. It has changed and in some cases saved American lives. It set this country on a smarter, stronger course. And today, after more than 50 votes in Congress to repeal or weaken this law, after a presidential election based in part on preserving or repealing this law, after multiple challenges to this law before the Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
Well, that may or may not be the case, but certainly he did win in court today. Joining us now, I'm very happy to say, is Alan Dershowitz, legendary Harvard Law School professor, Newsmax contributor, author of Terror Tunnels, The Case for Israel's Just War Against Hamas. And Alan, thank you for joining us. Your reaction to the 6-3 decision?
Well, it's the right decision based on a flexible view of how the court should interpret statutes. Now, clearly, the statute itself does have some problems, but it was intended to apply across the board, and there was just a drafting error. The hypocrisy a little bit is that the two justices who became the swing votes, Kennedy and Roberts, have written opinions in the past in which they've said, well, you really have to look at the language of the statute, not so much the intent of the legislature. So one can argue there's a little bit of result orientation here. They just didn't want to undo legislation which clearly had the general intent of going forward under current circumstances. So if you're a person who believes in the role of the court as kind of being a creative and practical institution, it's the right decision. If you believe the role of the court is simply to look at the words of the statute, then one could be somewhat critical. And
that's it. That's very interesting. An interesting point you bring up that I certainly wasn't aware of the possible, departure from previous rulings by Roberts and Kennedy in interpretation of a written law. Do you believe, and again, you said it could go, depending on what you think the role of the court is, you will have a differing opinion, but, what do you think of Scalia's, writing and the dissenting opinion saying we should call this SCOTUS care because this law has been saved by the court twice?
Well, he is completely consistent. He always says you don't look at legislative intent, it's too peripheral and ephemeral. You just look at the words of the statute. So he's being completely consistent. So are the other two justices. They're completely consistent. They may be wrong. Consistency may be the hobgoblin of small minds, as Emerson said, but they are consistent. The majority is not as consistent, although I can think of at least one case where Justice Thomas, when it came to guns, was inconsistent and gave a very broad reading of a statute that could easily have been interpreted far more narrowly. So I think, every one of the justices, if you go back and look at all their history, none of them is 100% consistent. Probably Scalia comes closest to it because he's an ideologue, and he really believes that the role of the court is simply to interpret what the legislature has said. So it was not unpredictable. And the interesting thing is when they appointed Roberts to be Chief Justice, they really thought they were serving the conservative interest. That backfired. When Roberts became Chief Justice, which he became right away, I think he decided to be a judicial statesman. If he had just been an associate justice, he might very well have come out the other way on the original case and on this case. But I think as Chief Justice, he sees his role as preserving the integrity and durability of the court. And that's an important thing.
Let me just ask you this. The proximity of the original law, the writing and the passing of the original law to this case, it's not like justices had to go back and say, 70 years ago, this is what they meant. Here, why couldn't they just have said, well, you know what? We're not going to do this. The Congress is here. Most of the people who are in Congress are here. Let them fix it.
Yeah, but they realize they're politicians. They live in Washington. Congress is different from the Congress that passed it. Today's Congress would not pass the Affordable Health Act. They would vote against it. So, if this were an overwhelmingly Democratic Congress, I can imagine Roberts saying, "Look, make it right." But he realizes that by striking this down and leaving it to Congress, that's the end of affordable health care.
Should that be his concern, though?
Of course not. Look, judges ought to be concerned only with the law, not politics. They ought not to be looking to see who controls Congress. But inevitably, judges are human beings. They live in Washington, D.C., which is a political city. They understand the realities, and they act accordingly. Who is it, Mr. Dooley, who said court watches the election returns? Well, maybe not so much the election returns, but it looks at the totality of circumstances and says to itself, are we going to do more harm than good if we strike this thing down? And I think they appropriately concluded they would do more harm than good.
What do you think is going to happen? I mean, might we get the next announcement on gay marriage tomorrow, or wait till next week? And what do you think that'll be?
It could be impossible to predict. I do think that we're going to get Justice Kennedy at least supporting some form of equality in the context of marriage. How far he goes is not clear. Roberts, that's a hard one on this. I think he may very well join the dissenting opinion and say, no, the Constitution itself does not compel a gay marriage. Look, this is amazing. 20 years ago, nobody believed the Constitution compels gay marriage, and indeed, people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and even Barack Obama did not support gay marriage. Nobody did. And suddenly, not only is everybody supporting it, but it's now constitutionally compelled. There's been no issue that has turned around so quickly.
I'll give you one, Alan. I'll give you one, Alan. How about the Confederate flag, literally overnight, now being banned from Target and Walmart? You can't even have an app on Apple now that with the Civil War game. That's how crazy that's gotten.
That's all wrong. Our pendulum swinging very wide.
Alan, I wish I had more time.
Everybody has the right to fly a Confederate flag, but no government should be involved in that.
Enjoy your holiday. Thank you, Alan Dershowitz. We're coming back with the panel, folks. Don't go away.